The boutique manager pointed toward the glass door with two perfectly manicured fingers. "Ma'am," Victoria Hale said smoothly, "this store isn't for browsing." The sentence landed softly, but the cruelty underneath it spread instantly through the showroom. Claire Bennett stood motionless beneath the warm gold lighting of Maison Élise, her faded beige coat hanging loosely around her shoulders. A small leather handbag rested against her wrist. Nothing about her appearance matched the women drifting through the boutique in diamonds and tailored cashmere. And everyone noticed it, especially Victoria. The manager's polished smile never moved as her eyes swept across Claire's coat, worn shoes, and loosely tied hair. "These pieces start at $10,000, Victoria continued, lowering her voice just enough to make nearby customers lean in. "You may be more comfortable somewhere else." Behind a perfume counter, two women exchanged amused glances. One of them let out a quiet laugh. The other whispered, "God, that's embarrassing." Claire heard them. Her fingers tightened slightly around her purse strap, but her expression remained calm. That calmness irritated Victoria more than outrage would have. Most people reacted one of two ways when embarrassed publicly inside luxury spaces. They became defensive or apologetic. Claire did neither. Her eyes drifted once toward the emerald necklace inside the central display case. A deep green stone surrounded by delicate white diamonds. Elegant, understated, expensive enough to make most customers stop breathing for a second. Victoria noticed the look immediately. "That necklace," she said lightly, "is reserved for private clientele." Claire nodded once. "It's beautiful." The answer was simple. Too simple. As if she genuinely appreciated the craftsmanship instead of the price. That somehow made the room even more uncomfortable. Near the register, Ethan Ward quietly paused while folding silk scarves. 24 years old and barely 6 months into the job, he had already learned how luxury retail operated. Appearance first, status second, humanity somewhere after that. Still, something about Claire felt wrong to him. Not suspicious, just composed, like someone completely unaffected by the performance happening around her. Victoria stepped closer in slow, elegant heels. "Please don't make this embarrassing," she said. The sentence created a subtle shift across the boutique. Customers stopped pretending not to listen. A man browsing watches lowered his phone slightly. Even Marcus, the security guard near the entrance, straightened uneasily. Claire finally looked directly at Victoria. Her eyes were steady, not angry, not ashamed. Steady enough that Victoria felt an unexpected flicker of irritation under her ribs. "I only wanted to see the necklace," Claire said quietly. Victoria gave a sympathetic smile so artificial it almost looked painful. "And I'm sure I'd love to test drive a Ferrari someday," she replied. "But Maison Élise values discretion. We can't simply allow anyone to handle private inventory." The word "anyone" hung in the air. Cold. Precise. One of the socialite women near the mirrors covered her mouth to hide another laugh. Claire lowered her gaze briefly. Not submissively. Almost thoughtfully. Then she reached into her handbag and unfolded a small worn receipt. Ethan noticed her hand trembling slightly. Victoria noticed too, and misread it immediately. There it is, she thought. Embarrassment. Finally. "Marcus," Victoria said without turning around. "Would you escort Miss?" She paused deliberately. Claire answered softly. "Bennett." Miss Bennett toward the exit? Marcus hesitated. It was brief, almost invisible, but Ethan saw it. The guard looked at Claire once, uncertainty flashing across his face before training and hierarchy took over. "Of course," Marcus said carefully. The boutique had gone quieter now. Even the soft piano music overhead suddenly felt too loud. Claire folded the receipt again and slipped it carefully back into her purse. Then she nodded. All right. No argument. No raised voice. No emotional scene. And somehow that made the humiliation worse. Because the room expected desperation, not dignity. As Claire walked toward the entrance beside Marcus, whispers spread behind her like slow-moving smoke. She actually thought she could afford that? These people always do this. Victoria handled that professionally honestly. The words bounced quietly across marble floors. Claire heard every one of them. But her pace never changed. Victoria followed several steps behind, maintaining the posture of a woman protecting the standards of an elite establishment. Inside, however, adrenaline was beginning to rise. Not because she felt guilty, because public dominance always thrilled her slightly. especially in front of wealthy customers, especially when control looked effortless. Marcus opened the glass door. Cold Manhattan air slipped inside the boutique. Claire stepped toward the exit. Then Victoria delivered the final blow. "Next time," she said smoothly, "dress like you belong here." The laughter came instantly this time. Soft, sharp, satisfied. Claire stopped walking. The laughter continued for exactly 2 more seconds. Then it died, because outside, black SUVs had begun pulling silently toward the curb. One after another. 3 vehicles. Polished black. Tinted windows. The kind that made people instinctively stare. Conversations inside the boutique slowed. Marcus frowned toward the street. Victoria's smile weakened slightly. The first SUV door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat over a dark tailored suit. His movements were controlled, efficient, practiced. 2 additional men emerged behind him, scanning the sidewalk with quiet intensity. The atmosphere inside the boutique shifted instantly. Not dramatically. Worse. Subtly. Like oxygen leaving a room. The man looked through the glass entrance. His eyes landed on Claire. And he froze. Actually froze. The executive composure disappeared from his face so quickly that even Victoria noticed it. Then he pulled out his phone. His voice carried clearly through the sudden silence. "Tell the board we found the owner." Nobody inside Maison Élise moved. Not even Victoria. And for the first time that morning, the room no longer felt under her control. Nobody inside Maison Élise spoke. The silence spread unnaturally fast across the boutique, swallowing the earlier laughter almost violently. Claire remained near the doorway, one hand resting lightly on her purse strap while cold Manhattan air drifted around her coat. The tall man outside ended his call immediately and stepped toward the entrance. His expression had changed completely. Not confusion. Concern. Behind him, 2 executives in dark suits exchanged tense looks before following several steps behind, like men suddenly aware they were late to something important. Victoria recovered first. Or tried to. Luxury retail had trained her for social uncertainty. Wealthy clients were unpredictable. Famous clients even worse. But this felt different. She straightened her posture instantly and moved toward the door with a polished smile already reforming across her face. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly as the man entered. "Welcome to Maison Élise." The man barely looked at her. His eyes stayed on Claire. "Ms. Bennett," he said quietly. The respect in his voice hit the room harder than shouting would have. Claire gave a small nod. "Daniel." Behind the register, Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Not because he understood what was happening yet. Because everyone suddenly looked nervous except Claire. Daniel Mercer approached her carefully, almost like someone worried he had arrived too late. "We've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes, he said. "The board meeting is about to start." Claire glanced once toward the street outside. "I know." Victoria inserted herself smoothly into the conversation before silence could deepen further. "I'm Victoria Hale, the boutique manager," she said warmly. "I apologize if there's been any confusion." Daniel turned slowly toward her. And for the first time, Victoria's confidence faltered slightly. Because his face didn't look confused. It looked cold. Not emotional. Not aggressive. Cold in the specific way powerful people became when they were deciding how much damage had already been done. "I see," Daniel said evenly. Claire spoke before Victoria could continue. "There's no need," she said softly. "I was just leaving." The sentence should have relieved Victoria. Instead, panic flickered unexpectedly in her chest. Because nobody with real status ever explained themselves this little. Daniel's eyes moved briefly toward Marcus near the door, then toward Ethan, then toward the customers pretending not to stare. He was reading the room, and the room knew it. One of the socialite women quietly lowered the champagne flute she'd been holding. Nobody laughed anymore. Victoria forced another smile. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding private inventory access," she explained carefully. "We maintain certain policies for client security." Claire looked at the emerald necklace again. "Only briefly." "I understand," she replied. That calmness returned. And somehow it made Victoria feel worse. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "What exactly happened here?" he asked. The question was calm, professional, but every employee in the boutique felt its weight instantly. Victoria answered quickly. "Miss Bennett entered requesting access to a reserved piece without an appointment," she said. "My responsibility is maintaining the experience expected by our clientele." The word clientele sounded uglier now. Even she seemed to hear it. Daniel looked toward Claire again. Did anyone speak to you disrespectfully? The room became still. Victoria's heartbeat accelerated. Because suddenly the answer mattered far more than it should have. Claire could have destroyed her immediately right there. Anyone with authority would have. Anyone humiliated publicly would have. But Claire simply adjusted the sleeve of her beige coat. No, she said softly. Relief flashed across Victoria's face, then disappeared. Because Claire continued. They were very careful about it. The sentence landed like glass breaking quietly somewhere far away. Ethan stopped breathing for a second. Marcus looked down at the marble floor. Even the customers visibly shifted uncomfortably now. Daniel said nothing, which somehow made the atmosphere heavier. Victoria laughed lightly, too quickly. Well, she said, luxury environments can occasionally feel intimidating to new visitors. She wasn't intimidated. The voice came unexpectedly from behind the register. Everyone turned. Ethan immediately regretted speaking. Victoria's eyes sharpened instantly. Excuse me. The young employee swallowed hard. His face had gone pale, but he kept looking at Daniel instead of Victoria. She only asked to see the necklace, Ethan said quietly. That's all. Victoria's polished mask cracked for half a second. Ethan, she said warningly, you're not part of this conversation. Daniel studied the young salesman carefully. And yet, he replied softly, he may be the only honest person currently participating in it. The room tightened again. Victoria felt heat rising under her makeup. This was slipping. Fast. She turned toward Claire with sudden exaggerated warmth. Miss Bennett, if there's been any discomfort whatsoever, I'd be more than happy to arrange a private appointment personally. Claire finally looked directly at her again. And Victoria felt something she had not expected all afternoon. Fear. Not because Claire appeared powerful. Because she appeared disappointed. You already arranged something very public, Claire said gently. Nobody moved. The sentence was devastating precisely because it wasn't loud. One of the women near the mirrors quietly stepped backward. The atmosphere inside Maison Élise was changing now in ways no amount of luxury training could stop. Earlier, customers had watched Claire with amusement. Now they watched Victoria carefully, looking for cracks. Daniel removed a slim black folder from beneath his coat. Several executives behind him straightened immediately. Victoria noticed the corporate seal stamped in silver across the cover. Her stomach dropped. Slowly. Horribly. Because she recognized it. Maison Élise Holdings. Corporate Executive Division. Daniel opened the folder calmly, then looked directly at Victoria. Ms. Hale, he said quietly. When exactly did you decide the majority owner of this company didn't belong in her own store? The room went completely silent. Not socially silent. Emotionally silent. The kind where people suddenly became aware of their own breathing. Victoria stared at him. Then at Claire. Then back again. No, she whispered automatically. But nobody answered her. Because deep down, everyone in the room already knew it was true. Victoria Hale's face lost color so quickly it almost looked unreal beneath the boutique lighting. No, she repeated faintly. Daniel Mercer closed the folder with deliberate calm. Around them, the atmosphere inside Maison Élise had completely changed shape. Earlier, customers leaned forward for entertainment. Now they stood perfectly still, trapped inside the consequences of what they had witnessed. Claire remained near the entrance, quiet as ever, her beige coat still buttoned, her posture unchanged. That somehow made everything worse. Because nothing about her had transformed. Only the room had. Victoria tried to recover. Years of managing elite clientele forced instinct back into her body before panic could fully take over. There must be some mistake, she said quickly. I've reviewed executive records personally. The ownership board is private. Daniel finished. His voice stayed calm, controlled. But there was something devastating about the restraint behind it. The majority shareholder has remained intentionally anonymous for years, he continued. That was Ms. Bennett's decision. Several employees exchanged stunned looks. Marcus slowly stepped away from the entrance, as if uncertain where he should even stand anymore. Ethan felt his pulse hammering in his throat. Victoria turned toward Claire desperately now. You are the owner? Claire's eyes lowered briefly toward the marble floor before lifting again. Partially, she answered softly. The understatement hit harder than arrogance ever could have. Daniel corrected her immediately. 71% controlling ownership. A sharp silence followed. One of the customers near the handbag displays actually covered her mouth. The two socialites who had laughed earlier avoided looking at anyone at all now. Victoria's lips parted slightly, because her mind was finally catching up to what her instincts had already realized. Everything she had done for the last 15 minutes had happened in front of the one person capable of ending her career instantly. And Claire Bennett had allowed it to continue. Not cruelly, not strategically, simply quietly. That realization unsettled Victoria more than anger would have. Daniel glanced around the boutique slowly. The board has spent 3 years trying to understand why. Customer retention has collapsed across flagship locations, he said. Ms. Bennett suggested the issue might not be operational. His eyes settled back on Victoria. She wanted to observe personally. Victoria felt the floor disappear beneath her. This wasn't random. This wasn't unfortunate timing. Claire had come here intentionally. Not to trap anyone. To see them honestly. The room felt colder now despite the warm lighting overhead. Claire finally stepped farther inside the boutique again. Nobody stopped her this time. Employees instinctively moved aside as she passed the jewelry displays. The same displays Victoria had practically guarded from her minutes earlier. Claire paused once more in front of the emerald necklace. Up close, the stone reflected soft green light against the glass. "It's beautiful craftsmanship," she said quietly. Nobody answered, because nobody trusted themselves to speak anymore. Victoria forced herself forward carefully. "Ms. Bennett, I sincerely apologize if..." Claire looked at her gently, and Victoria stopped talking. Not because she was interrupted, because suddenly the apology sounded ugly even in her own head. Too late, too polished, too practiced. Claire noticed Ethan standing rigid behind the counter. "You tried to help," she said softly. Ethan blinked in shock. You were uncomfortable before everyone else was." His throat tightened immediately. Nobody had ever noticed him inside this store before. Not really. Daniel turned slightly toward Ethan. "What's your position here?" "Sales associate, sir." "How long?" 6 months. Daniel nodded once, then looked toward Victoria without emotion. "And yet somehow your newest employee recognized a problem your management team ignored." Victoria's breathing became shallower. Several employees lowered their eyes instantly, because this conversation was no longer about one humiliation at the entrance. It was becoming something larger, something systemic. Claire lightly touched the glass near the necklace display. "When I started Maison Élise," she said quietly, "it was supposed to feel welcoming." Nobody moved. Her voice remained soft, but every word carried effortlessly through the silent boutique. "My mother worked retail for 30 years, Claire continued. "She used to tell me luxury wasn't about making people feel small. It was about making them feel cared for." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, because she already knew where this was going. "And today?" Claire asked calmly. "What exactly were you protecting?" The question destroyed what little composure remained. Victoria's polished posture cracked visibly now. "I was protecting the brand," she answered weakly. "No," Claire said, still gentle, still calm. "You were protecting your assumptions." The sentence spread across the room like a slow-moving wave. Marcus looked away entirely. One customer quietly set down a handbag she had been considering moments earlier. The boutique no longer felt luxurious. It felt exposed. Daniel opened the executive folder again. "There's more," he said. Victoria's stomach tightened violently, because now she noticed something she'd missed before. Several executives behind Daniel weren't observing the situation casually. They were documenting it. One woman held a tablet filled with notes. Another had already photographed sections of the showroom. Claire turned toward Daniel slightly. "That won't be necessary," she said softly. Daniel hesitated. "Claire, I've seen enough." The room went still again, because everyone understood what those 3 words meant. Not emotionally, professionally, irreversibly. Victoria took an involuntary step forward. "Please," she said quietly now. "I can fix this." Claire studied her for several long seconds, and for the first time since entering Maison Élise, something painful moved across her face. Not anger, sadness. "You could have fixed it before I walked through the door," she said. Nobody in the boutique could meet her eyes after that. Nobody spoke after Claire's last sentence. "You could have fixed it before I walked through the door." The words lingered over the marble floors long after her voice disappeared. Victoria Hale stood frozen beside the jewelry display, her polished confidence stripped away piece by piece in front of employees, customers, and corporate executives. And somehow the silence, humiliating her now, felt far heavier than the laughter that had humiliated Claire earlier. Daniel Mercer slowly closed the executive folder. The sound echoed softly through the boutique. Claire finally turned back toward the emerald necklace. For years, she said quietly, I visited stores anonymously. Several employees looked up in surprise. Victoria's expression tightened. Claire noticed. Yes, she continued softly. Not just this location. Her fingertips brushed lightly against the glass display. I wanted to understand what customers actually experienced when nobody believed they were important. The statement landed hard, because suddenly everyone inside Maison Élise began replaying previous interactions in their minds. The dismissive smiles, the subtle judgments, the carefully polite humiliations. How many times had this happened before? And how many people simply left quietly the way Claire almost had? One of the socialite customers shifted uncomfortably beside the mirrors. Celeste. Earlier, she had laughed openly when Victoria mocked Claire's clothes. Now she avoided even looking in Claire's direction. The atmosphere inside the boutique had become emotionally claustrophobic. Nobody trusted their own posture anymore. Daniel glanced toward the employees near the register. How often does management decide who belongs here? He asked calmly. Nobody answered. Not immediately, because fear was still stronger than honesty. Victoria recovered just enough to speak again. Our staff follows presentation standards expected in luxury retail, she said carefully. Visual profiling is common across the industry. The moment the words left her mouth, Ethan closed his eyes briefly, because even now, she still didn't hear herself. Claire turned slowly toward her. Visual profiling, she repeated softly. Victoria swallowed. It's not personal. No, Claire agreed gently. That's what makes it dangerous. The room fell silent again. One of the executives behind Daniel quietly typed notes into a tablet. Victoria noticed, and panic surged harder, because this conversation was no longer emotional. It was procedural, documented, permanent. Claire looked toward Marcus near the entrance. You opened the door for me. The security guard stiffened instantly. Yes, ma'am. You looked uncomfortable. Marcus hesitated carefully, then nodded once. I was. Victoria turned sharply toward him. Marcus lowered his eyes immediately. Years of hierarchy still lived inside his body. Claire noticed that too. You thought she was right? Claire asked him calmly. Marcus exhaled slowly. No, Victoria's face tightened. Marcus continued quietly, but she's management. The sentence changed the room again, because suddenly responsibility no longer belonged to one cruel person alone. It belonged to a culture, a system, a hierarchy people obeyed even when it felt wrong. Claire nodded faintly. That's usually how these things survive. Nobody moved. Outside, Manhattan traffic rolled past the boutique windows while inside Maison Élise, the emotional atmosphere continued collapsing inward. Daniel stepped beside Claire near the necklace display. The board wanted immediate executive review, he said carefully, especially after the Chicago incident. Several employees exchanged nervous looks. Victoria's breathing stopped briefly. Claire's eyes lowered. I know. Ethan frowned slightly. Chicago incident? Daniel looked toward the room. 3 months ago, he said evenly. A customer filed discrimination complaints after being denied service at another flagship location. The executives remained silent behind him. The store manager claimed the customer made staff uncomfortable. Now the room felt truly cold, because everyone knew exactly what that phrase meant. Claire folded her hands quietly in front of her coat. The customer was a school principal, she said softly. She'd spent 2 years saving for one handbag. Nobody could look at her anymore. Victoria's eyes glistened faintly now, not from sympathy, from realization. This wasn't one mistake. Claire had been watching signs of this culture spreading through her company for months. And today, Victoria had confirmed it personally. Daniel spoke again. The principal never returned to Maison Élise. The sentence sat heavily in the room. Claire looked toward Ethan once more. What did you think when I walked in today? The young salesman froze. Every eye turned toward him. He swallowed hard. Honestly, Claire nodded. I thought you looked tired. The answer stunned the room. Ethan continued quietly, gaining confidence now. Not poor, not suspicious, just tired. Claire's expression softened slightly for the first time all afternoon. My mother used to look tired too, she said. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, because somehow that small exchange hurt worse than public anger. It reminded everyone that Claire had entered the boutique as a human being first, and they had turned her into a category within seconds. One of the customers quietly picked up her handbag and moved toward the exit without speaking. Then another followed. Nobody wanted to remain inside the atmosphere anymore. Luxury had disappeared from the room entirely. Only discomfort remained. Daniel noticed the movement immediately. Interesting, he murmured softly. Victoria looked up weakly. The customers who enjoyed humiliation seemed less interested in staying for accountability. Nobody responded. Because it was true. Claire slowly removed the worn receipt from her handbag again. Victoria recognized it instantly. The same paper she had mistaken for financial embarrassment earlier. Claire unfolded it carefully. "It's from my mother," she said quietly. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers. She bought her first Maison Élise scarf 19 years ago. Silence. She kept the receipt because she was proud she could finally afford something beautiful. The boutique became utterly still. Claire looked around the showroom slowly. She cried in the taxi afterward because the sales associate treated her kindly. Victoria's composure finally broke completely. Not visibly at first. Just one small inhale that failed halfway into her chest. Because suddenly she understood the true horror of what she had done. She hadn't humiliated a random customer. She had humiliated the daughter of the woman who inspired the company itself. And the room was only beginning to realize how much worse things were about to become. The receipt trembled slightly between Claire Bennett's fingers. Not dramatically, just enough for the room to notice how carefully she was holding it. Like something fragile, something important. The paper looked old now, softened by time and folded at the edges from years of being carried inside a wallet. Claire studied it quietly for a moment before speaking again. "My mother worked 2 jobs, she said softly. One at a diner. One stocking shelves overnight. Nobody inside Maison Élise moved. Even the executives behind Daniel Mercer had stopped typing. She saved for almost a year to buy a single silk scarf from this company." Claire's eyes drifted toward the displays surrounding them. Gold lighting. Perfect mirrors. Luxury designed to feel untouchable. She told me the sales associate who helped her never once looked at her clothes. The silence deepened. Victoria Hale stood completely motionless now, her earlier authority gone so thoroughly that she almost looked smaller physically. Claire folded the receipt again with careful precision. That kindness mattered to her more than the scarf itself. Daniel watched the room closely, and what he saw disturbed him. Not because employees looked afraid, because many of them looked ashamed in recognition. As if Claire's story had quietly exposed things they had normalized long ago. Victoria finally found her voice again. "Barely. I didn't know," she whispered. Claire looked at her gently. "That's the point." The sentence broke something invisible inside the boutique. Because suddenly nobody could hide behind procedure anymore. Not policies. Not presentation standards. Not luxury branding. Only choices remained. And everyone in the room had witnessed Victoria's choices clearly. One of the executives stepped toward Daniel carefully. "We should move this discussion private." "No," Claire said softly. The woman stopped immediately. Claire looked around the showroom. It happened publicly. Nobody argued with her. Near the mirrors, Celeste finally approached hesitantly, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her arm. Earlier she had laughed when Victoria mocked Claire at the entrance. Now her makeup could not hide the embarrassment spreading across her face. "Ms. Bennett," she said quietly, "I'm sorry." Claire regarded her calmly. Celeste swallowed hard. "We shouldn't have laughed." Claire nodded faintly. "No," she agreed. The answer wasn't cruel. That somehow made it worse. Because forgiveness would have relieved the tension. But Claire wasn't comforting anyone. She was simply telling the truth. Brianna, the second woman, avoided approaching entirely. She stood near the perfume displays, staring down at the marble floor, as if afraid eye contact itself might expose her. Daniel turned toward the staff. "How many customers have left this store feeling humiliated?" Nobody answered. But the silence itself became an answer. Ethan's stomach tightened painfully, because now memories surfaced rapidly in his mind. Women ignored because they looked tired. Older customers watched suspiciously. People treated warmly only after expensive watches or luxury cars revealed status first. He had seen it. He had stayed quiet. And Claire somehow understood that too. Her eyes moved toward him briefly. Not accusing, just aware. That almost hurt more. Victoria suddenly stepped forward. "Please," she said shakily. "I know I handled this badly, but I can change." I can fix this. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. You believe this started today? Victoria stopped breathing for a second, because deep down, she knew it hadn't. This moment only exposed what already existed. Claire walked slowly through the boutique now, passing displays that had once represented her dream. Employees instinctively stepped aside as she moved. Not from fear alone, from respect finally arriving too late. She paused near a framed black and white photograph mounted beside the staircase. The first Maison Élise storefront. Small, simple, warmly lit. Her mother stood near the doorway smiling beside the original staff. Nobody in the room had ever realized who the woman in the photograph was. Claire touched the edge of the frame lightly. She believed beautiful things should never make ordinary people feel unwelcome. Victoria covered her mouth suddenly, because now she understood why Claire had looked at the boutique earlier with sadness instead of anger. This wasn't just business to her. It was personal memory, personal dignity, and Victoria had corrupted it publicly within minutes. Daniel finally stepped beside Claire again. The board will suspend regional leadership pending investigation, he announced calmly. Several employees visibly stiffened. Victoria's face drained completely. Daniel continued. All customer discrimination complaints across flagship locations will be reopened. The room became perfectly still again, because now consequences had become real. Corporate, legal, permanent. Victoria looked toward Claire desperately. I never meant to hurt anyone. Claire turned toward her slowly, and for the first time all afternoon, there was visible exhaustion in her eyes. That's what frightens me most, she said quietly. The words landed harder than any insult could have, because they were true. Victoria hadn't acted out of hatred. She had acted out of comfort, habit, assumption, the kind of cruelty people stopped noticing because environments rewarded it. Outside the boutique windows, afternoon sunlight had begun fading into muted gray. Inside, Maison Élise no longer resembled the elegant luxury space customers entered earlier. It felt stripped open now, human, exposed, ashamed. Claire handed the old receipt quietly to Daniel. Frame it, she said softly. Daniel looked down at the fragile paper carefully. Claire's voice grew even quieter. And place it beside the entrance. Nobody in the room could meet her eyes anymore. The next morning, Maison Élise opened an hour late. For the first time in years, the flagship store's marble floors echoed without music. No customers. No champagne trays. No carefully rehearsed greetings. Only quiet footsteps and the low murmur of executives reviewing reports near the entrance. The atmosphere felt hollow, like a theater after the audience had gone home. Ethan arrived early and stopped abruptly when he entered. The framed receipt was already mounted beside the front doors. Simple black frame. Soft white lighting. Nothing extravagant. Just a faded 19-year-old receipt beneath a small silver plaque. Kindness is remembered longer than luxury. Employees slowed as they passed it. Some stared for several seconds before, continuing silently deeper into the store. Nobody joked that morning. Nobody even spoke loudly, because the emotional weight from yesterday still lingered in the walls. Marcus stood near the entrance in full uniform, though his posture had changed entirely. Less performative, less rigid. When Ethan approached, Marcus nodded quietly toward the framed receipt. She really did it. Ethan looked at the glass frame again. Yeah. Marcus exhaled slowly. I keep thinking about how close she came to just walking away. Neither man spoke after that, because both understood the same thing now. If the black SUVs had arrived 30 seconds later, Claire Bennett would have disappeared into Manhattan, carrying humiliation instead of dignity. And nobody inside Maison Élise would have stopped her. That realization haunted the building more than corporate investigations ever could. Upstairs, inside the executive conference room, Victoria Hale sat alone at the long glass table. No tailored confidence remained now. No polished luxury composure. Just exhaustion. A cardboard box rested beside her chair containing framed certifications, designer notebooks, and the gold nameplate that once sat proudly on her desk downstairs. Former general manager. The title already belonged to the past. Victoria stared blankly through the conference room windows overlooking Manhattan traffic far below. Yesterday afternoon, she had controlled the atmosphere of the entire boutique with a smile. Today, nobody would even meet privately with her. The collapse had happened that fast. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Claire Bennett entered alone. Victoria immediately stood. Not from protocol. Instinct. Claire still wore simple clothing, though today her coat was charcoal gray instead of beige. No jewelry except a thin silver watch. No visible signs of the wealth capable of reshaping entire companies overnight. Victoria suddenly understood something painful. Claire had never hidden power. Other people simply failed to recognize dignity without status symbols attached to it. "I didn't expect you to come," Victoria said quietly. Claire closed the conference room door behind her. "For years," she replied. Softly, "I avoided these conversations." Victoria lowered her eyes. "I deserve that." Claire remained standing across from her. The morning light softened the room into pale silver tones, washing away yesterday's sharp luxury glow.